Welcome to Milton Obote, the father, the fighter, the controversy. This story is read by me, Mugisha, and produced with Bantu Studio. In this first chapter, we look at the early life of Milton Obote, the boy from northern Uganda who would grow into the country's first prime minister and twice its president. Chapter 1: Early Life and Education. Milton Obote was born on December 28, 1925, in a small village called Akokoro in Apec district, located in northern Uganda. He came from the Lango ethnic group, a proud community known for its resilience and traditions. His father, Stanley Opeto Obote, was a local chief, and his mother, Janet Akelo Obote, came from a farming background. Though not wealthy, the family valued education and discipline. From his earliest days, Milton was taught the importance of hard work, respect, and leadership. As a child, he attended mission schools established by Christian missionaries. These schools were often the only way for African children to gain formal education under British colonial rule. Young Milton proved to be a bright student, curious about the world beyond his village. He developed strong skills in English and history, subjects that would later fuel his interest in politics. By the 1940s, Obote's talents carried him to Busoga College Muiri, one of Uganda's top schools at the time. There he met young men from across the country, expanding his understanding of Uganda's diversity. Muiri gave him confidence and exposure, preparing him for the next step in his journey. In 1948, Obote was admitted to Makerere University College in Kampala, the most prestigious institution of higher learning in East Africa. At Makerere, he studied English literature, economics, and political science. The college environment exposed him to the ideas of Pan-Africanism, the belief that African nations should unite to resist colonialism and reclaim their future. But his time at Makerere was cut short. After just 2 years, he was expelled following a student strike against university authorities. Though it was a setback, it marked the beginning of Obote's life as a man unafraid of authority and willing to challenge the system. After leaving Makerere, Obote moved to Kenya, where he worked various jobs, including teaching and clerical work. While in Kenya, he witnessed firsthand the Mau Mau uprising, a movement of Kenyan fighters struggling for independence from Britain. This experience deepened his political awareness. He began to see colonialism not just as a system of administration, but as a force that oppressed African identity, dignity, and progress. By the early 1950s, Obote returned to Uganda with a sharper mind and a stronger political vision. He had seen poverty and injustice under colonial rule, but he had also tasted the power of education and collective action. The boy from Akokoro was no longer just a village son. He was becoming a man of ambition, ready to take his place in the struggle for Uganda's independence. Chapter 2: The Road to Independence. The 1950s were a decade of change across Africa. From Ghana to Kenya, nationalist movements were rising, demanding independence from colonial rule. Uganda, still under the British flag, was no exception. Milton Obote, now back from Kenya, found himself drawn to politics. His experiences at Makerere and in Kenya had sharpened his sense of injustice. He believed that Africans were capable of leading their own nations free from colonial masters. Obote began his political career quietly, working within local councils and speaking with community leaders. He had a gift for communication, not fiery or emotional, but calm, logical, and persuasive. He built his influence step by step, especially among the Lango people in northern Uganda. In 1957, Obote was elected to the Legislative Council, LECO, Uganda's colonial-era parliament. At the time, Africans had limited representation, but Obote quickly stood out. His speeches were sharp, his arguments well-prepared, and his confidence clear. He was not intimidated by the British officials who still dominated the chamber. As the independence movement grew, Obote realized that Uganda's politics were deeply divided along ethnic and regional lines. The Buganda kingdom, the largest and most powerful, often clashed with nationalists from other regions. Buganda leaders wanted autonomy, while nationalists demanded a united, centralized Uganda. In 1960, Obote helped form the Uganda People's Congress, UPC, a party that sought to unite non-Baganda groups and push for national independence. The UPC quickly became a strong force, appealing to northerners, easterners, and smaller communities who feared Buganda dominance. But Obote also knew that to win power, he needed Buganda's support. In a clever political move, the UPC formed an alliance with the Kabaka Yeka K party, which represented Buganda's royalists. This alliance gave Obote the numbers he needed to outmaneuver the Democratic Party DP, which had strong Catholic support. In 1962, Uganda finally gained independence. The new arrangement placed Milton Obote as the country's prime minister, while Sir Edward Mutesa Tund, the Kabaka of Buganda, became president in a largely ceremonial role. For Obote, this was a triumph. In less than a decade, he had risen from a young politician in the Legislative Council to the head of an independent nation. But the arrangement was fragile. Uganda was free, but it was also divided between kingdoms and republicans, Catholics and Protestants, northerners and southerners. Obote's partnership with the Kabaka was one of convenience, not trust, and as history would soon show, the dream of independence would quickly give way to a struggle for absolute power. Chapter 3: Power Struggles and the 1966 Crisis. Independence in 1962 had been a triumph, but Uganda's political foundation was fragile. The partnership between Prime Minister Milton Obote and President Sir Edward Mutesa II, the Kabaka of Buganda, was uneasy. It was an alliance of necessity, not trust. Buganda's leaders wanted autonomy, while Obote believed in a strong, centralized republic. The differences soon grew into open conflict. By 1964, cracks in the alliance were clear. Obote faced opposition from the Democratic Party DP, but also from within the UPC itself. The question of federalism, how much power Buganda should have compared to the rest of Uganda, became a national crisis. Meanwhile, Obote began relying more and more on the army to secure his government, and at the head of the army stood a tall, charismatic officer, Idi Amin. Amin had proven himself in operations in Congo and had built a reputation as both fearless and loyal. Obote promoted him rapidly, seeing him as an ally who could hold the military in line. But this reliance came at a cost. Amin was ambitious, and his growing influence in the army would soon become dangerous for Obote himself. The breaking point came in 1966 when Obote faced accusations of corruption linked to the Congo gold trade. His opponents accused him of profiting illegally from military operations carried out by Amin and Ugandan troops. Rather than face investigation, Obote struck back. He suspended the constitution, removed the ceremonial presidency, and declared himself executive president of Uganda. The Kabaka resisted. He demanded that Obote withdraw his government from Buganda's territory. Obote responded with force. In May 1966, he ordered the army, led by Idi Amin, to attack the Kabaka's palace at Mengo Hill in Kampala. The assault was brutal. Soldiers stormed the palace, firing heavy weapons. The Kabaka barely escaped, fleeing into exile in Britain. From that day, Buganda's monarchy was broken, and Obote ruled without challenge. This moment, the 1966 crisis, transformed Uganda. It ended the delicate balance between kingdoms and the central government. It also set a precedent. Power would be enforced not by dialogue, but by military might. Obote emerged stronger, but at a price. He had centralized authority, but in doing so, he had planted the seeds of future dictatorship. His partnership with Idi Amin, once a tool for survival, would soon turn into his greatest threat. Chapter 4. The First Regime, 1966 to 1971. After the 1966 crisis, Milton Obote stood firmly as president of Uganda. With the Kabaka exiled and Buganda subdued, Obote believed he had secured his power. But in reality, Uganda had entered a new era of centralized rule, political tension, and increasing reliance on the military. Obote introduced his vision of a new Uganda through what he called the move to the left. Inspired by socialism, this policy aimed to nationalize industries, banks, and key businesses. Obote believed that wealth should be controlled by the state, not foreign companies or private elites. His plan was to build equality and African self-reliance, but while the ideas sounded noble, the implementation was flawed. Nationalization scared away investors and created opportunities for corruption. Those close to Obote and his Uganda People's Congress (UPC) benefited, while ordinary Ugandans saw little improvement. Politically, Obote consolidated power further. He banned opposition parties and turned Uganda into a de facto one-party state under the UPC. Dissent was silenced, and critics were often harassed, jailed, or intimidated. At the same time, Obote leaned heavily on the army to maintain his position. And the man at the center of that army was Idi Amin. Amin had become the army chief of staff, commanding loyalty from many soldiers, particularly from the northern regions. He was popular among the troops for his charisma and generosity, but his growing influence alarmed Obote, who began to see Amin as more rival than ally. In 1969, Obote survived an assassination attempt. He was shot in the face but recovered. The attempt deepened his paranoia. He increased his personal security and tightened control over political life. Uganda was no longer a hopeful young democracy. It was becoming a state run by fear and suspicion. By 1970, tensions between Obote and Amin had reached breaking point. Reports surfaced that Amin was secretly enriching himself through deals in Congo and building a personal power base within the army. Obote considered sidelining him, but before he could act, history intervened. In January 1971, while Obote was attending a Commonwealth meeting in Singapore, Amin seized the moment. soldiers loyal to him staged a coup, taking over Kampala and announcing that Obote's rule was finished. Just like that, Obote's first regime collapsed. After 5 years as president, he was overthrown by the very man he had trusted to secure his power. Obote fled into exile in Tanzania, where he would spend the next 8 years, watching from afar as Idi Amin plunged Uganda into terror. Chapter 5. The Years in Exile, 1971 to 1979. On January 25, 1971, Milton Obote's world collapsed in a single day. While he was in Singapore attending a Commonwealth conference, his trusted general Idi Amin seized power in a coup. Obote was forced into exile in Tanzania under the protection of President Julius Nyerere. For Obote, he was both humiliating and painful. He had led Uganda to independence, centralized power, and built his presidency, only to be toppled by the very man he had once promoted. From Tanzania, Obote watched as Amin ruled Uganda with brutality and recklessness. At first, some Ugandans welcomed Amin, but soon his regime became infamous for killings, disappearances, and economic collapse. Obote, though bitter, realized that Amin's growing unpopularity could one day open the door for his return. During the 1970s, Obote worked tirelessly to rebuild his political base in exile. He remained the head of the Uganda People's Congress (UPC) and began organizing Ugandan exiles, intellectuals, and former soldiers who had fled Amin's regime. Nyerere's Tanzania became the hub of anti-Amin opposition. Obote and other exiles built training camps, gathering fighters who would later join the war to oust Amin. But this was not without difficulties. The opposition was divided into factions, with leaders clashing over ideology, ethnicity, and personal ambition. Obote often struggled to unify the groups under his leadership. Still, Obote's persistence kept him at the center of the opposition movement. He maintained international connections, met African leaders, and positioned himself as the natural choice to return once Amin was gone. By the late 1970s, Amin made a critical mistake. In 1978, his army invaded Tanzania, attempting to annex part of the Kagera region. Nyerere responded with force. The Uganda-Tanzania War began, and Obote saw his opportunity. Tanzanian forces, allied with Ugandan exiles, many loyal to Obote, marched north. They captured town after town, and in April 1979, they entered Kampala. Idi Amin fled into exile, and his dictatorship was over. For Obote, it was a moment of triumph. After 8 years in exile, his rival was gone. Now, the question was whether he could reclaim Uganda and restore his leadership. But as history would show, Obote's return would not bring peace. Instead, Uganda was about to face another turbulent chapter under his second regime. Chapter 6. The Second Regime, 1980 to 1985. After Idi Amin was driven from power in 1979, Uganda entered a period of chaos. Different groups fought to fill the vacuum. The Uganda National Liberation Front, UNLF, formed a transitional government, but it was fragile, with rival factions pulling in different directions. Amid this uncertainty, Milton Obote saw his chance. He returned from exile, determined to reclaim the presidency he had lost nearly a decade earlier. In December 1980, Uganda held elections. The results declared Uganda People's Congress, UPC, Obote's party, the winner. But many Ugandans and international observers believed the election was rigged. Obote's main rival, Yoweri Museveni, leader of the Uganda Patriotic Movement (UPM, rejected the results. He declared that the only way forward was armed struggle. Thus began the Bush War, a conflict that would define Uganda's future. Obote's second presidency was immediately beset by violence. His government leaned heavily on the army, led by generals like Oyat Ojok and Tito Okello, to fight insurgents. But the army itself was divided and often brutal in its tactics. In the Luwero Triangle, a rural region north of Kampala, government forces launched fierce counterinsurgency operations against Museveni's rebels. Villages were burned, civilians massacred, and thousands displaced. The area became a graveyard, remembered in Ugandan history as one of the darkest chapters of Obote's rule. Obote defended his government, claiming he was fighting bandits and preserving national stability. But to many, his second regime was marked by repression, bloodshed, and worsening economic hardship. Inflation soared, corruption spread, and international confidence collapsed. The violence only strengthened Museveni's National Resistance Army, NRA. What began as a small rebel force grew steadily, gaining support from rural communities who had suffered under government troops. By 1983 to 84, Obote's grip was slipping. The war drained the economy and divided his own party. In 1983, his army chief, Oyat Ojok, was killed in a helicopter crash, a devastating blow to the regime. Without Ojok's discipline, the army became even more unstable. Finally, in July 1985, Obote was overthrown in a military coup led by his own generals, including Tito Okello. For the second time in his career, Obote fled into exile, this time for good. Chapter 7, Fall, Exile and Legacy. In July 1985, Milton Obote was overthrown for the second time, this time by his own army commanders. The coup was led by Tito Okello and other generals who had grown frustrated with Obote's leadership and the endless war against Museveni's rebels. Obote fled into exile, this time in Zambia, where he was received by President Kenneth Kaunda. Unlike his first exile in Tanzania, Obote knew that this time he would never return to power. Uganda had moved on, and Museveni's National Resistance Army (NRA) was rising fast. In January 1986, Museveni's NRA captured Kampala, ending Tito Okello's short-lived government and beginning a new era of Ugandan politics. Obote, watching from Zambia, became a distant figure. During his years in Zambia, Obote lived quietly but remained active in the Uganda People's Congress, UPC, still serving as party president. He continued to speak about Ugandan politics, criticizing Museveni's government and defending his own record. But his influence faded as new generations of Ugandans grew up under NRA rule. Obote's health declined in the early 2000s. On October 10, 2005, at the age of 79, he died in a hospital in Johannesburg, South Africa, while receiving treatment. His body was flown back to Uganda, where he was given a state funeral. Thousands attended, including political leaders and ordinary Ugandans, reflecting the deep divisions and mixed feelings about his legacy. Legacy. Milton Obote's legacy remains complex. As Uganda's first Prime Minister and later President, he played a central role in leading the country to independence in 1962. He is remembered for his political intelligence, his ability to maneuver through alliances, and his vision of a united socialist Uganda. But he is also remembered for his failures, authoritarian rule, human rights abuses, economic decline, and his reliance on military power that opened the door for Idi Amin. His second regime in the 1980s left scars, especially in the Luero Triangle, where countless civilians lost their lives. For some, Obote is the father of Ugandan independence. For others, he is a symbol of lost opportunities and unfulfilled promises. What is certain is that Obote shaped Uganda's early history more than any other leader, for better or worse. His life offers lessons about the dangers of centralized power, the cost of political repression, and the importance of building democratic institutions. The Father, the Fighter, the Controversy. Read by me, Mugisha, and produced with Bantu Studio. We have now completed the life of Milton Obote, from his humble beginnings in Akokoro, to his rise as Uganda's first Prime Minister, to his presidencies, his exiles, and his enduring legacy. Stay with us on Bantu Studio YouTube, where we will continue to bring you powerful stories of African history, so that we may learn, remember, and never forget